Hey everybody, welcome back to Endure, the Athlete Story. On today's show, we have the incredible story of Joe Mc Connellogue. Joe has undergone 4 open heart surgeries and has then went on to complete a half Ironman. He's the only person that we know of in the world that has ever done this. Joe's story is inspirational. Joe takes us through how he had to overcome 4 open heart surgeries, his fight back to health and fitness, and how his mindset and his positivity played a massive role. Joe tells us how triathlon was a solace for him in the midst of fear and uncertainty about his life. He takes us through how he was lying on a hospital bed fighting for a breath to going to race a half Ironman, fighting for a time and positions. So I hope you enjoy this episode. It's so motivating, so inspirational, and from someone like Joe, they have known for many years that he's never spoke about this before, never opened up about it. So we thank Joe for coming on and opening up, sharing his story, and he hopes that it can help and inspire and motivate other people. So thanks to Joe for coming on the show. This episode will be in 2 parts. So this is part 1, and we'll have part 2 coming next week as well. Really hope you enjoy the show. Please share it on to anyone that you feel needs it, that'll be inspired and motivated by it. And thanks again for listening. Thank you. Joe Mc Connellogue, welcome to Endure, the Athlete Story. Thanks for coming on the show. How's things?
Not too bad, Emmett. Thank you.
Good stuff. So, just getting into it, I suppose we'll give a bit of background, Joe, to why we have you on the show. So, Joe's had 4 open heart surgeries, and not only is that extremely rare, and probably no one in the UK has had that in the last 20 years or so, but Joe just completed a half Ironman last week after these 4 procedures. So we don't think that it's ever been someone has ever done a half Ironman, and we'll get into the times and stuff too. Not only did he do it, done it very good times. So it's an incredible story, Joe, coming from, I suppose you would agree, it near death experience. They within a couple of years, being fit and healthy and completing a half Ironman. So could you just take us through that, how that happened?
Well, it's a long story, but my heart condition is something that spans over 20 years. I had my first surgery in 1999. And before that diagnosis in 1989, I didn't know that I had any heart condition at all. In fact, I had never been in hospital and I had never been sick outside of what normal people would have had: colds, flu, stomach aches, things like that. I'd been in hospital, had stitches like any other child growing up, falling off your bike or, things like that, bumping your head. I think I was bit with a dog once or twice and had to get stitches. But outside that, never been to a GP or to in hospital. So I was what they called asymptomatic. So that sort of all started in 1999, but my triathlon story, which sort of coincides and has the same timeline, as this started in 1998, and that was the first time, I suppose, where it came into my head that I would like to do a triathlon. I did grow up playing football like everybody else, did a bit of cross country running at school, and I think it was called the Milk Cup back then. It was just sort of played in the school football team. They just anybody that had a bit of a sporting background got to do these things. So I was always one
Mhm.
of those people that played a bit of sport. I could swim. I think I went to City of Derry once with a friend of mine, Eddie Doherty, who's a very good swimmer, and that once was enough. I realised then that I could swim, but I wasn't actually a swimmer. But I was always about sport and enjoyed sport. I was getting to the end of sort of what I would have said my football career. I played football at a decent level, didn't ever, it was Saturday morning, Sunday morning, but I always played for a team that was winning leagues and cups and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
for me, that was a decent level. Um, and a lot of gym stuff. Went to gym with my brother Paul, who and that's sort of where triathlon came on it. We sort of thought we could do something different,
Mhm.
And we tried everything over the years, but a boxing training and anything at all we would have tried. So Paul did a triathlon, the lane ball, in 1998. It was the old lane ball. Probably not near prepared or didn't have the knowledge. They just went out and someone who was reasonably fit and got round the course. And I think he'd tell you it was very difficult. But we sort of decided that we would maybe do a bit of serious training. And
Mhm.
not when you have the Northwest Triathlon Club, we would have seen the guys about the Templemore Sports Complex. And back then, you were talking like people like Terry Donnelly and stuff who were.
Mhm.
So we thought, well, we'll give this a go and see if we can, do it with a bit more sort of professionalism, if you like. So we
Mhm.
started training for it. And when I look back, I never had a clue. Yeah, not really. I don't know if anybody did back then, but we definitely didn't. And so that's how we started training over the winter. Our plan was to do the triathlon again in 1999. But that's then, I was still playing football at the time at a bit of a lower level than I had been for previous years. I had sort of stepped down a bit, and I was probably the oldest person on the team. There was a lot of young boys playing and stuff like that, and I was there sort
Mhm.
of to give. Took a knock to the rib and had a bit of a bruised rib, but I mind that morning before I went out to play, I felt fluish, but that never stopped you. If you had the flu back then, you went to work, you went and played your football match, you did whatever you were doing, and you just sort of got on with it.
Mhm.
So I did feel fluish that morning. Took a bit of a knock to the rib, and I came home. It was Saturday morning game, and I fell asleep. Probably because I was suffering from the flu. So I fell asleep on the sofa. When I woke up, the knock the ribs had kicked in. It was, if you've ever had a bruised rib, but I later found
Mhm.
out my rib was cracked. There's nothing they can do about that anyway. It was painful to breathe and to take a deep breath. So my wife, came in from work. I think she was working that day. And she says, "You're a bad colour." And I says, "I'm not feeling the best." And I said, "I got a knock on the side.
Mhm.
And that went on at about 7 o'clock at night. She said to me, "I need to take you to the doctor. You dead." I couldn't. I was struggling to breathe from what I know now was the cracked rib, but I also
Yeah.
felt, I was shivering, all those flu
Yeah.
symptoms, sweats, cold sweats. So I never went to doctors, only and it took me. So it was an out of hours doctor, so it wasn't my regular doctor, and he just said, "Yeah, you've a bit of a flu and you've damaged that rib." And he sounded my heart as he did. And he says, "Do you know you have a heart murmur?" I was 27 at the time. This was February 1999. I says, "No, I've never been to a doctor's really." And
Mhm.
he says to me, "You need to go and see your GP." And I wasn't even sure who my GP was, to be honest. And I says, "Well, how do I make an appointment?" And he said, "Go to your GP at 9 o'clock on Monday morning." I went, "What about the appointment?" He says, "Don't worry about it. I'll sort that." So he was able to sort that out in the out of our system.
Mhm.
So I went to work on Monday morning at 7 o'clock with the flu and with a cracked rib, and spoke to my boss and said, "Look, I have a doctor's appointment at 9 o'clock." I just was and explained. She said, "That's no problem," because I never missed a day at work or anything like that.
Mhm.
So we went to the appointment at 9 o'clock, and the GP listened, and basically whatever the out of hours doctor had sent him, he just was interested in listening to my heart. He wasn't really interested in the flu or the knock to the ribs or anything. So he said, "Look, don't worry about this." And what he said to me, I remember vividly, was I had a friend at university and he had the same thing. "These things are trivial. It's nothing to worry about."
Mhm.
So he sounded at me and he went, "Oh, this isn't trivial." And I thought, "What do you mean it's not trivial?" And he says, "Well, sometimes a heart murmur could have been caused by your fever or whatever." He says, "But I don't know about this. This isn't trivial.
Mhm.
I'm going to refer you to the cardiology department."
Mhm.
So that was sort of it, to be honest. That was February, Emmett, and I went back to work and I said, "I need to go and see this heart murmur, I need to go and see a cardiologist." people were saying, oh, loads of people have heard murmurs and that. So remember the day of my appointment. I don't know why I remember this date, but it was the 4th of May, and I was working and had no symptoms at all. All the symptoms that were to come with this condition, I didn't have any of them ever. Lightheads, blackouts, shortness of breath. Never did I feel sick, or never did. And when I recovered from the flu and the bruised rib, I was back playing football and doing, all the
Mm.
things I'd done. So asymptomatic totally over the whole time. So I went to see the cardiologist, and it was a Dr. McNeil, who was the lead cardiologist out in McGillivray. And back then it was videotapes they used, it was old technology. So I had what they call an echo, which is basically a scan of your heart, and it's the same as an expectant mother would have. It's the gel on your chest and
Mm-hmm.
they scan your heart. So I mind Dr. McNeil, and he was I got to know him very well over the years, but he was an old school type doctor, wore the white coat and things like that. So he was doing the scan on me, and it was very nice. But halfway through the scan, he went to his desk and lifted the phone and said, "Can I have a videotape on here?" And Una was at that point, and we were sitting, "Oh, what's going on here?" So he went back about his business and scanning. And a couple of minutes later, he lifted the phone again, but this time he was a bit more agitated. And he said, "I need a videotape on here right away." So I was starting to go, "This doesn't sound good." Like, I mean, as I say, I'd never been in a doctor's before. So it was the sister. I had worked on the health service, so the department sister came in and gave him the tape, and he recorded whatever he had seen at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And he said to me, "That you put your shirt back on." So I was 27 at the time. So he sat down, and I mind looking at him, and he had a white coat on, and the pens in his pocket. That's what I remember. It was sort of a surreal experience, like.
Mm.
And I was looking at him, and he said, "Right," he says, "Do you want the good news or the bad news?" And I went, "Jeez," like. I says, "Well, what's the good news?" And they said, "The good news is he came here today." And I went, "Well, I don't want to hear the bad news." And he turned to him and he says, "Well, the bad news is he didn't come here today. You'd have been getting to knock the door within the next 6 months." And I was a candidate for cardiac sudden death. So it was a priority one. And the aortic valve, the condition was called aortic stenosis, and the valve had practically closed and was over 90% closed. And this valve should open and close and let the blood flow through your heart, but mine was a jet, like a pinhole. And they still don't know how it wasn't passing out or feeling sick or weak or anything like that. So he said to me, "Go home, do nothing, and I'll get in touch with you." And I had a mobile phone then, believe it or not. This was 1999. It was one of those old mobile phones. So we left and we drove home. Um, he told me I was going to have open heart surgery, and I said, "What? Oh, no, what does that? What is that?" And
Mm.
he says, "Well, they have to open you up." And he says, "A very serious operation." And back then in 1999, it was a lot more serious than it is now, because it was a lot more. It wasn't as refined as it
Mm-hmm.
is now. So we were basically cracking open somebody's chest, and so he explained this to me and gave me leaflets, but it hadn't really sunk in. I was driving home, and me didn't really speak because we didn't know what to say.
Mm.
Um, Jane, my oldest daughter, she had just turned one. She was 1 and 1 month today. Her birthday was on the 4th of April. I thought, when they were talking about survival chances and things like that, it was all just a blur in my head. I mean, this can't be right. Like, I don't feel sick at all. Like. So I went home, and on the way over the new bridge, the Foyle Bridge, he rang and said, "I've made an appointment for you to see a cardiologist in the Royal Victoria Hospital." So that was a Tuesday, and I had to see him on the Thursday. I thought, God, this is all happening very quick. So I went to see the cardiologist on Thursday. His name was Gianfranco Campilani. He was Sicilian, and he was probably the most renowned cardiac surgeon in the UK at the time. It was either him or his brother, who was a cardiologist in the Glasgow Royal Infirmary at the time. So travelled home, went to Belfast to see him. Sort of had really sunk in. As a family, we nobody ever had to have heart surgery. We didn't really, maybe knew one or two people that had, so didn't really know how to phone my work and tell them what had happened, and that I wasn't allowed to go back to work until I got this sorted. So got and had my appointment in Belfast, and the surgeon had just said, you're a priority, and we'll have to get this done as soon as possible. So it was beginning of May. I seen him, and I sort of hung about doing nothing for about 6 weeks and fishing and stuff like that. And everybody was sort of waiting to see what happened and what this open heart surgery was about, suppose, including
Mm-hmm.
myself. But it didn't really bother me. I have to be honest with you, it didn't really bother me. And it was probably a godsend because I didn't know what was coming.
Well, that's what I was just
And
going
that
to
was
ask you.
ignorance. Ignorance was bliss.
When you're waiting about for that 6 week period, you're saying like what was going through your head? Because as you
Um,
say, it's just
at that time, I have to say, I wasn't overly worried, and I wasn't, it wasn't a difficult time for me. I just, at the time, it was a bit of a shock, but
yeah.
after that, and as I say, it was ignorance. What I
Mm-hmm.
know, if I had known then, what I know now, I probably wouldn't have been as relaxed about it.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, "Look, we need to plan this surgery. You're going to have to have surgery." And I read a few leaflets and British Heart Foundation and things like that, but none ever prepares you for the reality of it. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
so. They said they would send for me. They didn't give me a date, and then as it got close to the time, they said the 23rd of June. I'm sure, but I was away fishing, and when I got home, I sort of knew there's something not right here. The house, the lights weren't on, and there was just something. Did you ever get a feeling?
Yeah.
And when I went down, there were people standing waiting on me there, family members, and they said, "You have to go to Royal tomorrow." They mixed up the dates. I actually was in on the 21st, which is the longest day on the summer solstice.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I remember anything about it. So I had to go to the hospital, and even then, we travelled up the Royal, and there was members of the family there. My wife was. I still wasn't aware. I don't think they were what was actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
Got me in the hospital, and then they started the tests and things like that, shave you from your neck to your knees, and we're having a bit of a laugh about that and stuff. And then I was having my surgery the next day, so they give you sedatives and that. So my memory of that was very. I don't remember a lot about it. You're a bit doped.
Mm-hmm.
So next thing I remember, I was waking up, and that was probably the worst feeling. I felt as if I was hit with a train. I couldn't move. I was black and blue. I couldn't move uh, anywhere. I just couldn't lift my torso up off the bed. It was like
Mm-hmm.
there was a weight on you that you couldn't move. You were trapped under and you couldn't move. I thought, geez, what happened here? Like, did something go wrong? But nothing did go wrong. I mean, the first surgery was, I went down, had my surgery, and it's a straightforward enough surgery. They replaced the valve, but I hemorrhaged. So I had to go
Okay.
down during the night again and be opened up again. And this is where all my bother started. When you open somebody up for the first time, they work in hard, it's in a sack of liquid. But
Mm-hmm.
once you open that up, that's gone. So I was all scar tissue, and then opening up the second time, they're peeling things away and stuff like that. But I had the surgery, and I had a tissue valve, and at that time, to say it was 1999, and that was good, I suppose, because it gave me a better chance of not needing as much medication and stuff like that anymore. I just had heart surgery with know that. So
Mm-hmm.
um, the first surgery was a real shock to me, and I never felt sick until I was there. I was never sick until they opened me up, and the weeks, 2 weeks after that was just, I never had any procedure ever, and
Mm-hmm.
then I had this, which was probably one of the most invasive, and I had to be opened twice because of the hemorrhage and stuff. So it was sore and stuff like that. But I got out of hospital, and I started to recover. It's amazing what the body can do. Within 4 weeks, I mind batting a tennis ball off the wall, a tennis racket.
Just to
And
do something,
so
or just the
I was so bored, and it was the summertime. I think Wimbledon was on, and
yeah.
and I was batting a tennis ball off the garage wall. But never at that time did it crossed my mind to start back in the triathlon,
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't. So I just had my recovery, got back to work, got back and did a bit of exercise. I actually played football matches again after, believe it or not. So sort of got back to what I called normal, but the whole triathlon thing was shelved for me at that
Mm-hmm.
stage. Paul had went on to do a few, but always had one eye on it, and I cycled a bit. I
Mm-hmm.
like cycling. I cycled a bit. So I think, I was under the care of doctors. I made a really good recovery back at work. It was as if, I felt I recovered really quickly. I think I was back to work in October,
Mhm.
and I had my surgery in June. So, I was grand. I was young. I was 27. So then, about 2004, it was the triathlon notion hit me again. So I started training again
Mhm.
with a view of doing the Roe Valley Triathlon. And that would have been in May, the beginning of May. They used to swap the dates about, I'm sure, back then between the Lane Ball and the Roe Valley. So that would have been May 2005. So training away for triathlon, swim, bike, and running down to the triathlon club with a view of doing that triathlon.
Mhm.
And went to one of the sessions they used to do was the master swimming session in William Street pool on Monday night. So went to that session, did the session, came home, was lying in bed, and Una woke me and said, your chest is making a strange noise. And I laughed. I said, what do you mean? She says, this whole bed is shaking. There's something wrong. So again, she talked me going to an out of hours GP. So
Mhm.
this was a Thursday night, and I think the triathlon was that Saturday. So up there, GP again, not my own GP. I don't even know who the GP was, but he sounded me and he went into panic mode. And again, I sit and going, these boys were panicking because when you have heart surgery and you go to a GP and someone doesn't know your history, the first thing they do when they sound your heart is go, that
Mhm.
doesn't sound normal, and it doesn't. So I thought he was overreacting. He panicked a bit. So he said, you need to go to the hospital right away. And I said, right, okay. He says, how did you get here? I said, I drove up. He's right, you need to go to the hospital. So I left the GPs, and he was panicking more than me. I would safely say. So I left there and I drove to Elton McGill. And when I got there, there was a guy waiting at the door with a chair, and he says, "Look, you should have came here in an ambulance. You shouldn't have drove." I says,
Mhm.
"I'm okay." Like, so I went down to the hospital. I was Thursday night, seen my cardiologist on the Friday morning, and he did a scan and told me I was going to need the valve replaced again. So it hadn't lasted 6 years, which was a bit of a shock to me
And did they
because
give
I
you any
thought,
time scale of what it might have lasted, or did they expect it to last
well, it,
forever?
it was a pretty new aortic valve replacement in 1999 was a pretty new procedure. Before that, when I mind reading it and think I'm really lucky, people just died because they couldn't
Mhm.
do nothing. And that's the way it was. And so, it wasn't a million years before that. So it was still in its infancy, that procedure, I would say.
Mhm.
So the valve I had was tissue, and how they described to me, it had hardened like a pepperoni on a pizza. That's how they described it to me, and that
Mhm.
it would need replaced. Because it was my second surgery, I was going to have to get a what they call a mechanical valve, which is titanium and other materials like so.
Mhm.
But with that, there was things where you had to be on warfarin and more medication for the rest of your life, which was grand and really bother me. But I was worried about the surgery because I knew what was coming.
Mhm.
Um, I knew all the things that was going to happen and the pain and discomfort you'd be in after it. And as I say, ignorance was bliss, and I didn't have that this second time. So that time, I was lucky enough. I went to hospital and I didn't get out, and this was in May 2005. So 6 years basically after my initial surgery. So I went in the hospital and May. I wrote some dates down. I went down to the hospital in May um, 2005, and I had my surgery in May 2005. I stayed in the hospital. I was in about 3 weeks. I went to Royal, had my surgery. They did the surgery and they put on the titanium valve. I woke up and I wasn't let down by my previous experience. I was in pain and agony. Um, really sick, really, really sick, throwing up. Didn't feel well at all. Didn't feel as well as I felt after the first one, and I put that down to a second surgery.
Mhm.
The second surgery wasn't unusual, especially for aortic valves, because people who did get a tissue one often had to get it changed to the mechanical one.
Yeah.
Not as quick as me, but it, so sort of put it down that. But it was really, really sick you had there's a process. You come out of your surgery, you go into the ICU, and they get you out of there in a day, and the high dependency unit, and then they get you up and walking. And it's it is a process that they have. They bring you back to your feet, and then you go to the hospital ward, and start taking drains out, you have wires sticking out of your chest. Anyone who ever had heart surgery would know that. And as those days progressed, the better you started feeling. I wasn't feeling better. I was feeling sicker and sicker. And I think I threw up for most part of 7 days. And it's a long 24 hours. It's when you're sick like that for 7 days and you're vomiting and a mind lying in the bed at that time thinking, I can't go on like this, can't go on and on and on. So I came around a wee bit and they said they were going to let me out, but I definitely wasn't feeling well. I remember that. And before you leave hospital, you get an echo.
Mm.
So I got an echo and I was sent home, packing. Didn't feel well, wasn't eating, felt sick. Something just wasn't right.
Mm.
So got sent for an appointment about 10 days after being home to go to Altnagelvin. Went over, seen my cardiologist, and he's did another echo, which was I found strange. And he just said, he won't be going home. So she was sent home to get pajamas and things like that. So I said, what's wrong? And he says, before you left the hospital in the Royal, you have what we call a paravalvular leak. It is basically you're bleeding inside the valve that the stitches haven't taken. So I was losing weight rapidly. I was feeling sick. I couldn't eat. I was lightheaded for the first time in my life.
Mm.
Um, I just felt only time I felt sick. So I was in hospital. I had been in before my surgery for the best part of 3 weeks. Was in the Royal for a week. Got out for 10 days and I was back in hospital. And that's where I stayed basically for the next 10 weeks. Um, I was in isolation and things like that. They were doing a lot of tests. They weren't sure what happened. They thought the mechanical valve had stuck on one side. There was a lot of they couldn't see in the scans. There was a lot of blood
Mm.
going, regurgitating, not going where it should have been, but they couldn't really see where it was coming from. So basically, the only option was to get me back and more surgery, open me up again. And the surgeon, Mr. Campbell, did me two previous surgeries. Was home in Sicily on holidays, but they couldn't do the surgery anyway because it was too soon after
Mm.
the other one. So stayed in hospital. The cardiologist out like Elvin was going on holidays himself, and he put me in an ambulance and sent me to Royal. So I spent a couple of weeks there before surgery, and then the surgical team was gathered. They got back from their holidays, and they all came in and seen me on a Sunday night, and I was in the operating theatre that Monday morning at 6 o'clock, I think. And I had felt the whole time in between. I had felt sick. It was a long time in hospital. I had lost a
Mm.
lot of weight. I think it was maybe getting down by 9 stone, maybe on earth.
Mm.
Um, so they did the surgery, and the minute I woke up, I knew whatever they had done, they had fixed the problem that was causing me to feel the way I felt because I felt so much better.
Mm.
And even the pain of opening the third time didn't really matter because I knew whatever they had done, they had fixed. So that's when they told me a valve had leaked, it was bleeding inside, and they got it stopped and got the valve sealed up, and that everything was grand. So usual recovery, got out, got my scan, got out, and everything was fine. Wasn't a lot of medication. Was very weak and lost a lot of weight. And again, triathlon at that stage never entered my mind because for me, I tried in '99. Um, heart failure stopped it for me again in 2005, and it stopped it again for me. So
Mm.
didn't really do much by the way of exercise for a long time because I couldn't.
Mm.
Um, didn't get back to work. It was over a year. That was a long recovery for me, a very long recovery, and I wasn't in good shape. I had felt I had lost any athleticism I had, my physique, everything went out the window. But I did recover, and I did,
Mm.
but it was slow. This was 2005, and for the record, I actually did get doing my first triathlon, but it was in 2011, 12
Mm.
years um, after my first attempt. But all
Oh,
those years in between was very slow road to recovery, especially after the third surgery.
yeah.
And what I did was started to strength and conditioning, lift weights, light weights, ridiculously light weights. Um, just anything to try and get back to some sort of physical shape. Started to swim. I actually
Mhm.
became a better swimmer than I ever was previous. Not that I'm a good swimmer, but better than I was previous to that.
Yeah.
Because I found that exercise very good. It wasn't sore on me.
Mhm.
Just didn't run at all for some reason, and I don't know whether it was just my physical makeup, my physique, or the heart surgery. Running was very, very difficult to get into,
Mhm.
and remained like that for years. Got back on the bike and found that I enjoyed the bike, liked the bike, and because of that, I was able to do more and more of it.
Mm.
So that was 2005, and again, both times it was about a 4 year gap before I got back. So I would say 2009, I felt I might have a go at a triathlon. And by the time I started getting the 2010 season was too late. I didn't feel that I
Mhm.
was ready for the 2010 season. Paul at this time had done numerous triathlons and had gotten pretty decent and pretty good at them
Mhm.
and knowledgeable. And that was a big thing. He had the knowledge. Very apprehensive of me training and training the way they trained, but um, they had a very good training philosophy, which you know now yourself is zone one, and that suited me.
Yeah.
And that's all I did for 2 years was zone one. I was the last off the bike, the last and on the run, the last out of the pool in every training session. Not because I wanted to train more than everybody else, because I was so much slower than everybody else. But that was okay.
Yeah.
I was doing it, and that was the important thing. And you started to meet other people who were coming on the triathlon, Sean Heaney, Gary O'Donnell, Colin Quigley, and I started to enjoy the training, and we would have went to
Yeah.
Platinum in the morning and done some biking. You know the routine yourself.
Yeah.
Joined the club, so really enjoyed it. Was feeling good. Was in good health. Everything else was going well. By that stage, I had 3 children. Work was going well. Every other aspect of my life was going well. I thought maybe this might be a time to give this a go. And the training was going well, and I did no speed work at all
Mhm.
back then, none. 2 weeks out, I think, from the race that I was going to do, which was the Roe Valley Triathlon again in 2011. That was the first race on the calendar,
That's a sprint
and
distance, isn't it? A sprint distance. Yeah.
sprint distance triathlon, and that's all I ever done. Um, but I went on there to finish it, to try and get round the course, and to be honest with you, I didn't know whether I would or not
Mhm.
on that. I did all the distances before and stuff like that, but I had watched triathlons, and it's not an easy sport, especially for those people who are at the fore and racing them. And I thought, God, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. So I trained back then what I would consider well. It was all zone one training, plenty of recovery. Um, Looked after myself, was feeling good. The cardiologist was very, he said it's not bad. He was asking me what I was doing. I had annual checkups and I was telling him what I was doing. He actually loved telling him about it.
Mm.
And he says, look, it's not doing you any harm. Go ahead. And that was one thing I discovered. There wasn't anybody on the planet would say to me, go ahead and do a triathlon. It'll not do you any harm. It was sort of my decision, and there was no medic going to give me the go
Yeah.
ahead. You know, I had heart failure. Once you have heart failure, you always have it, and I was always in heart failure. I suppose doing a triathlon and being in heart failure is not a good idea. Not that people have done it before with different heart conditions, but at this stage I had 3 open heart surgeries, and probably no one had done it with that then.
Mm.
So, but my cardiologist gave me some comfort in that he didn't tell me not to do it.
Yeah.
He said I was in good shape, I was healthy, all my numbers, all my readings, all my tests were good, and I had been training away. So I did the Roe Valley Triathlon, and I did it, and um, I did it in 1 hour, 11 minutes, and 58 seconds.
Which
I went
is
on the race with it,
a
which was
very
good
very
for
good
me. I
time
thought it was, I thought it
for
was
your
good.
for your
Um,
first
I went
triathlon after
for my first
3 heart
triathlon,
surgeries. It's a
3 heart
incredible
surgeries.
time.
I went on with it saying I'd like to do under 130, under 125. I'd be really good because you look down the list in previous years and you said I'd like to be Tom. I'd like to be, we all do it. Like what? That's why it's the nature of people who get into the sport. Like we
Yeah.
all do it. That's why we're there. So I couldn't believe 1 hour, 11 minutes and 58 seconds. And wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. As I got into the end of the run, I was working like anybody else, but
Mm-hmm.
and I really, really enjoyed it, and it was a great, you know, it was great for me to get it done, and because I'd been trying for 12 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I got it done. So being the person I am, I entered the lane ball, which was in a couple of weeks' time. And I did that, and it was a real storm. I came 33rd in the Roe Valley, by the way, which I was chuffed. Now, there
Yeah.
wasn't as big a crowds doing them then. So I entered the lane ball and did that, and it was a time of 1 hour 14, but it was a real stormy day, and I actually came 19th. So that
It
tells
was.
you what the
Yeah.
times,
Yeah.
so top 20 was unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
So then my mentality changed from someone who had heart disease and heart failure to being a triathlete.
Mm-hmm.
So I done that year, and I did try the lock on Roma. It was the first year that was on, 2011, I'm sure. And did the swim, good swim. I think it was only one of our group doing it that day. Just it was a new triathlon, and most of the guys didn't enter.
Mm-hmm.
So did the swim, did the bike, an ordinary road bike with ordinary wheels, and got off the bike in second place. Got into transition, went, what's wrong here? There's no other bikes. And then people who I knew were watching said, you're second. I thought I couldn't believe it. So got out in the run. And the run was never my best discipline. Didn't like it. Wasn't a fast runner. People started to pass me in the run, but I held on for 14th place, and I can't remember my time, but
Mm.
I think it was 1:12. It wasn't. The Roe Valley was still my best time. So that was where my triathlon journey started. And then just for years after that, I'd done different all sprints. I
Yeah.
think I'd done 2 Olympics,
And
but all sprints. Um, about 2000, City of Derry then came along.
yeah.
Health was good. Was focusing on triathlon, focus on work, having regular checkups. Dr. McNeil, my cardiologist, saying keep doing what you're doing. That was his line. It's not doing you any harm. Started to take it a wee bit more serious for the City of Derry triathlon, because that was a big event. The numbers doing triathlon then had just exploded.
Yeah.
Got 25th in that, I think, out of a field of well over 500.
Yeah.
That was good. And then I started to get more serious, and then I thought maybe I could go under 110 here. So I did a full season, and every race I did was 106, 107, 108. So that was sort of the pinnacle of my
Mm-hmm.
sprint. I never got any better than that, but I was happy
Yeah.
with that, like, because I never expected to get times like that, never ever.
It's
Especially with me now.
incredible
I'd be,
times
they
with
were, but with that condition, and I was
the
never a good
condition
runner.
with the years doing it. You were only a few years at it, and plus, like, especially the condition and even that mental aspect of, did that ever bother you, that when you're pushing on the race that something might happen here, or did you just have to completely blank it
I
out?
was no, it was always there, and it never. And there were some races. The first race I went on, I done the lane ball one year, and that's our home race, and I really wanted to do well in that, and I did a time of 108. But I mind getting into the back end of the run and thinking to myself, I was really suffering as you do. And I thought this couldn't be during the run. I said to myself, this couldn't be good for my heart, because I was really on the limit, and I
Mm-hmm.
was in the red. And at that time, I mind saying to myself, push on. If you die, you die. And that was my mentality, which was crazy, like, and it gets worse. But
Uh,
that's the mentality I had, and a lot of triathletes do have it. Not just me. I just had this extra condition, but that's what I was prepared to do to get to the finish line, to
yeah.
take those risks and push on. I enjoyed the sport that much. I did. I really did, and I was doing a lot better than I had ever imagined. As I say, the
Yeah.
first time I thought 130 would be good, and here I was now pushing under 110s, and I'm being at the front end of the race. And it was, at best, I was running a high 20 minutes for 5K, which wasn't good really. So my other disciplines, my swim, my bike, were really good. I was always getting in the top five in the bike, which,
Yeah.
and for me, that was good enough. I didn't think I would ever get any better than that, and I didn't get any better than that, but that was okay, because by that stage I was well in my 40s, and I'd beat a lot of people who I would have held in high esteem as being good triathletes. Like, so I
Mm-hmm.
was really, really happy with how I'd done in the sport. And sort of after about 2016, 2017, I probably pulled back a wee bit and went into more enjoying the sport, or I tried. I
Mm-hmm.
tried to enjoy it more, in the sense that just go out, do the sport, forget about times, enjoy it. But you can never do that as a triathlete, or I could never do it. And I know most of the people that train we can't do it once you, as they say,
Yeah.
when the toes on the line, it's a race. So
Yeah.
I never really fully did that. Um, my career then sort of took over a bit. I was traveling from Derry to Belfast every day. I was still training, but I wasn't doing as many races and I wasn't doing as good as times. I was sort of in around the 110,
Mm-hmm.
anywhere between 1:09 and 1:12 I was doing. And I was happy with that because I was still in the sport and I was enjoying it. Probably cycled a wee bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings me then sort of to my fourth um, surgery, which was totally unexpected. Was working away, did the 2018 lane ball, as I say, did okay. I think I'd done a time of 110 whatever seconds. Was but raging at that because I thought it
Mm-hmm.
would be nice to get under the 110. That was our home race. Did several races the year before. I was enjoying the sport.
And feeling good,
Started
Joe, health
feeling
wise,
good.
and
No, never. I never had any. I would always say I never had any symptoms ever. The only time I was sick was after surgery,
mm-hmm.
and between the second and third surgery, I was really, I would say, it wasn't well. So had my annual. My cardiologist, Dr. McNeil, retired, and I had sort of been transitioned to a new cardiologist, Dr. Hughes. And they're all very good, but that was a big change because I was under Dr. McNeil for 20 years, and he knew me very well, and I knew him, and you just
Mm-hmm.
get a wee bit of confidence from that.
Mm-hmm.
Although Dr. Hughes, knew me well, got to know me well. Obviously, Dr. McNeil and the handover had filled around in my sporting background and things like that. So December, um, I was traveling up and down to Belfast, working away and training for the 2019 triathlon season.
Mm-hmm.
And I had sort of thought in my mind, I'd pick it up a wee bit now. Things have settled with work. I had for about 4 or 5 years. I've been doing a lot of courses, getting promotions and things like that. I'm more focused on my career,
Mm-hmm.
but still training. But that had all settled, and I thought I'd maybe give the 2019 uh, season a wee blast. And I was starting to think about going longer distance then.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of my mates, Ironman and things like that had become much more popular. When we were doing it, was always sprints,
Yeah.
very few, and then Ironman and things like that, and people were doing really well at them, and that was on my head to maybe try that if I got a wee bit more time. So went for a checkup in December 2018, and you have what you call a TOE, which is a camera goes down your throat and gets a good look at the heart, and you're sort of sedated for that.
Mm-hmm.
So woke up or came round after, and Dr. Hughes came to see me and very quickly said, "You're going to need more surgery." Couldn't believe it. Could not believe it. Was the shock of my life. And people said, "But you've heart disease and you've had 3 surgeries." But I genuinely thought that
It was
three
done. Yeah.
times I'm fixed. So I couldn't. I didn't believe it, and I didn't believe. And I used every excuse. Oh, it's a new cardiologist, doesn't know me, and I never told anybody. I went home and said I had my checkup. It seems it was this last 10, 14 years. It's okay. Like. And then I eventually told him it. This doctor says I might need more surgery. Went back to work the next day, and I didn't tell anybody about it. And I said, don't be saying anybody because I don't think it's right. I don't believe it. I feel too good. And I continued to train for the 2019 season.
Mm.
So I didn't hear nothing. This was late December, just before Christmas. So Christmas and the New Year happened, and then I got an appointment out to go to Roma Hospital to have a dye test.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to that appointment, and the surgeon or the consultant was there, and I said, "There, you know, what's this test for? Is this to see if I need the surgery or not?" And she looked at me and says, "No, you need the surgery. You're only functioning your heart. You're in heart failure. You're only functioning. You're functioning less than 20%." I said, "But how? I've got a titanium valve, and these things are supposed to last a lifetime." She says, "You have another condition called PANIS, where basically you overheal." So I was overhealing. So my own tissue and my aorta was growing over my valve, the titanium valve, and stopping it from working, blocking it, basically. And the overhealing of the scar tissue from the previous three surgeries had got, it had got so like concrete. That's how they explained it to me. Says you're going to need more surgery. And says I'm just doing this test to make sure that your arteries and all are okay. Because my heart surgery was never to do with my lifestyle, or I didn't need arteries ever. I mean,
Mhm.
very rarely would they open someone up in their late 40s and not do a bypass
Mhm.
because they're in there. I never needed anything like that. I had no other illnesses, no other conditions whatsoever,
Yeah.
just the risk of heart surgery. So I think she realised at that appointment that I was, I don't know, you could maybe say in denial.
Mhm.
So she says, you need to go and see a heart surgeon. So Mr. Campbellani, who did the previous three and was very highly thought of, and I had retired. So I thought, God. So I had to go to the Royal to see the heart surgeon, and I worked right up that, and it was the 26th of February, and I took a week's holidays because I had holidays to take before the end of the holiday year. So I went to see him, and he he put me right. He explained very graphically the condition I was in,
Mhm.
took my car keys off me, told me to forget about my career, um, asked me what I did for a living, and I told him what I did. That I travelled to Belfast every day. I was a senior manager in the health service. And he says, "Well, that's all over, like
Mhm.
there and then." He told me that, and I don't remember really much about it. It was like I don't know what happened to me that day, but they put it into words. It was very difficult. Una was there, and she was distraught. I was just did not know what was going on. I think I went into shock.
Mhm.
And he called for a test, and I can't remember what the test is. I still can't remember because he just explained to me that I was about to have this surgery. A fourth heart surgery was very rare. He couldn't guarantee me that I would survive, and that he didn't really know how to go about it. Um, and he said with all the scar tissue and adhesions that it was going to be very difficult, and that he would be starting to plan with the surgical team that day how he was going to do this surgery. And basically, what they have to do is put together a file, a worst case scenario file, if you like, of
Mhm.
all these things that could happen and what they can do to try and, you know, stop them from happening. So I left the Royal that day, couldn't drive home, and the next week was probably one of the worst weeks that I ever endured. But believe it or not, I went out on a bike that evening. I was trying to keep some, and I wasn't in a good place. And I was out cycling with Paul, and I told him that night, sort of very briefly, what had happened and what was happening.
Mhm.
I think he was in shock as well. So he came to see me, him and some other members of my family that night. So I told them things out, and I told them, and I didn't want my mother and father to know
Mhm.
because it was very serious. And I didn't want my children to know because they were both at very pivotal times and they're at university and stuff like that and exams. And I just thought, this was the end of February that they didn't need to know. So he had told me that day that he would be planning the surgery and it would be done as quick as they could possibly safely do it.
Mhm.
And I didn't know at that time. I thought maybe they'd be talking a few weeks because that happened before, but it took them so long to plan the surgery. I had to go and go through so many tests. And one of the people I went to see was a Dr. Wally McBride, which was his name, believe it or not. And he was the head anaesthetist in the Royal, or one of the chief anaesthetists. And he looked through my folder and he was looking at my folder and he kept lifting his head off his desk and looking up at me. And me and Una were at the appointment. And after about 10 minutes, he said nothing. He just looked at me and says, "Your medical history is horrific. This was before the fourth surgery." And I went, and he looked at Una and says, "Were you with him when this all started?" And he tried to be light-hearted. And she says, "I." And he says, "I would think so because you would never take this on." And I was sitting going, "What's in that folder that he's telling me this?" Like, so I had to play the waiting game. And initially, when I was told in December that I was going to have a fourth surgery, I sort of said, "I can't come back from this." I knew how difficult it was the previous three times. I was a younger, fitter man. And I thought, I can't come back from this. I had told that I was just about to lose my job, but I had worked on it for almost 30 years. And there was just so much change. So my initial thought was to give up and just thought, I'm never going to get back from this. It's impossible to do
Mm-hmm.
this. And the way they were talking to me, if I said, if I get out of this surgery, and that was a big if, um, there's no way. I mean, I never even thought about triathlon. It was the last thing in my head, just surviving, really, it was.
Mm-hmm.
But I went out on the bike that night that they broke the news to me, and that probably was a good thing to do. And I continued to ride my bike, and I made a decision after about 2 weeks that I was going to continue to ride it. And we all know what it's like to prepare for a race, to train.
Mm-hmm.
I put together a training schedule to get me to the operating theatre in the best shape that I felt that I could be in to deal with this surgery. Having had it done 3 times before, I knew, the effect it had on the body, and the physical body and the mental body. So I put together a training schedule, and it didn't include any running. No surprise, because I always felt running was a wee bit more taxing on me.
Yeah.
And so I cycled, not hard and not long, a lot shorter than what I was doing, but I stayed on my bike and I swam, and I did a lot of strength and conditioning, press ups, pull ups, and I put weight on
Mm-hmm.
intentionally. So that's what I did. Everybody else was preparing to race a triathlon, training to race a triathlon, and I was training to have heart surgery and give myself the best chance of survival. So I did that, and believe it or not, I had my surgery. They told me I would have my surgery on the 3rd of June. So I was in the hospital on the Sunday the second, and believe it or not, I was on the exercise bike in the cardiac ward on the Sunday night.
After
And that was
or before the
the
surgery?
night before I was going for surgery. So that was the mentality that I had. And the surgeon and the anaesthetist came to see me that night, and they were, saying that this was going to be a very difficult surgery for them, and they were giving me no guarantees whatsoever. And they didn't really know because they couldn't see things with all the scar tissue. They didn't know what they were getting into, really. And they were very honest with me, very brutal, but very honest. So when you're going for heart surgery, your family leave you that night, and that sort of time between that and going down for surgery is a long, strange time. You could
Mm-hmm.
never understand it unless you've experienced it. So I was fit, had trained, and I went down, and I thought I wasn't worried, or I wasn't, mentally I was well prepared. I didn't feel as bad as I did in the lead up to it, or when the news was broke to me. I had sort of said, "There's nothing I can do. I've done everything that I can do
Mm-hmm.
now
Mm-hmm.
to bring myself to this in this shape," and I was in good shape. I felt for going for surgery. So the Sunday night, the surgeon came and he went through what they were going to try and do, and what they were going to try and do was replace my aortic root because I had that many surgeries. They just didn't think they could stitch another valve in the flesh because you're stitching titanium or man-made material on the flesh, and it's
Mm-hmm.
difficult. So he was going to replace the whole aortic root and the aorta and new valve and anything else that he needed to do when he was in there. And that's what his plan was. Because I had so much scar tissue, my heart was stuck to the back of my chest. So nowadays, when they do heart surgery, they can get in and out in 3.5 hours. They open you up with your beating heart exposed. They then put you on bypass directly into your heart and stop your heart. My heart had to be stopped before they opened me up for the fear of cutting it. They cut you open with what they mean you looks like a grinder, your sternum. And I had already been wired and stitched there several times before, so that made it more difficult. So I was bypassed through my groin, which is a surgery in its own. You're lumping about for 3 or 4 weeks after, and that presents much more risk. So the fear of putting anybody off going for heart surgery, I mean, it is survivable. I'm proof of that. But just the experience of those weeks from your surgery, you start to get out of ICU and on the hospital ward and things. I'll give you some detail, and it's pretty graphic. So, surgeon and anaesthetist came to see me. A lady called Dr. Bull. Bull was her surname. She was the leading most anaesthetist in Northern Ireland, and she wanted to reside over my surgery, and she did. I seen her on the Sunday night, and I seen her on Thursday, and she hadn't gone home because in the previous surgery discovered that I had a very high intolerance to things like morphine and pain relief, and that is not a good thing to have when you're having heart surgery because the pain is excruciating, especially a fourth time. So she wanted to be there, and they were trying to make up like a pain killing cocktail that wouldn't make me sick. So the surgeon said to me, "Is there anything you want to say to me before you go?" And I says, "You get me off the table, and I'll do the rest." And he never said no. He just left. And I thought, so they started to give me a sedative. So I lay there, and it had no effect on me. I was wide awake, looking at the theatre lights the next morning at 4 o'clock with a team of surgeons around me. And everybody over that week said 4 times. I don't think we've ever, and people don't mean any harm when they're saying that, but you're going, Christ almighty, like what am I in for here? So away I went and had the surgery. And I don't remember anything about it. You'd probably need to speak to Una about that, but apparently the surgery was long, 16 to 18 hours. Um, I actually have a recording I'll let you hear sometime. I don't think it probably would be appropriate to put in this podcast, but I'll let you hear. 7 hours in, they were going to call it. That wasn't good. Like. So he spoke to Una, and there's a recording of that conversation. And basically, as I say, heart surgery now can be done and dusted in 3.5 hours. 7 hours in, they had just basically got to my heart because of all the scar tissue, and he described it as a concrete jungle. And when he got there, he discovered that there's 4 arteries going into your aorta, two got in and two got out, and they were very close to my aortic valve. Most people would have 20 or 30 mil of a gap. So that was the first stumbling block. Getting on there was very difficult. I'd been on bypass a lot, and there's a lot of things come with that: memory loss, hallucination, kidney failure, diabetes, all that. So he got on there and he discovered this, and it was a bit of a blow to him, he said, because he couldn't do the aortic root replacement. So they stopped surgery for a while because he said he had 2 mil to work with, and they had to make a decision. So he told me after this that I remembered me telling him, "You get me off the table." So he said I had to try, and he said he was exhausted. He had been doing all the work, the lead surgeon, a man called Mr. Ruben Jaganathan, a Malaysian. I know now he's one of the most renowned cardiac surgeons in the world. So he had to go, and he did it. He had 2 mil, they said. 2 mil, that's what he said, I had to work with. And in that time, he says he had damaged all our things, the electrics of my heart, the septum, which your heart's broken into 4 chambers, and if you damage them, it's like crossing 2 wires. The electrics get messed up. But that was okay. That was, a secondary result of doing the surgery. So we got the valve in and he cleaned up the aorta, all the pannus growth of the scar tissue off it the best they could. And he said once they do a heart surgery like that and they fix the problem that you're trying to fix, they start to revive the patient because you're clinically dead. You're on a bypass machine that's breathing for you, it's pumping your blood, it's keeping your brain alive, oxygen to your brain. And I had been on it for a very long time, which brings lots of risks. So he said they started to take me off that, and that's where complications can happen. But he said, in all his career, he never seen or experienced what happened next. He said he says it can take people hours to get their lungs open, to get their kidneys functioning, their bladder functioning, the heart beating. And he said within 25 minutes, my lungs were at over 90% capacity. The kidneys were working almost 100. He says it was like magic. It was like flicking a switch. Once they started the heart again, he says everything else came on the line. And he said he felt so overjoyed himself
Mm.
because it had been the most challenging surgery he had ever done. And he felt, and he said he kept thinking back, saying to me, saying, "You get me off the table and I'll do the rest."
Mm.
And he said to me, when I came around and he came up to see me, he says, "You'll need a pacemaker and this and that." And I said, "That's okay." He says, "Your kidneys," or thought I might have needed kidney dialysis, or he says, "You're not a diabetic. You're making insulin. Your kidneys are functioning. Your lungs are now 100%. This is amazing. Like, you've
Mm.
been." And after a couple of days, he kept coming and look at this monitor, and there was a surgeon in his registrar, and his registrar says, "I'm just let you in the secret. We have a bet going. I don't think you'll need a pacemaker." But the surgeon was adamant that he says, "I damaged it. I seen what the damage had done. Your heart can't, the electrics of your heart are damaged. It can't work right. It's impossible." It's over 2 years since I had my surgery and I don't have a pacemaker. So,
Unbelievable. So, show's over. Thanks everybody for listening. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of this remarkable story. Stay tuned next week for part 2, where Joe takes us through his recovery from his 4th open heart surgery and his road to the half Ironman. And he tells us about his training, his mindset, the things he had to endure and the things he had to go through just to get there and just to get back on his feet. So again, really inspiring stuff, and I hope you enjoy it. If you did enjoy the show, please share it on with anybody who might be interested. Please leave a review, leave us comments, feedback. We'd love to hear from you, and I hope you enjoy. But thanks again for listening. It means a lot. Cheers.